Hey everyone, my name is Francisco Escobar and welcome to Conversamos. As we continue our second season, focusing on La Familia and Latinidad, this episode is going to be on adopting Indigenous children. Stay tuned as Latin Entertainment presents Conversamos. Before we announce our panel, we would like to promote this episode's Facebook page, Network of Bolivian Adoptees, with a mission to create a virtual space to share experiences in relation to Bolivia, adoption, and to connect with our other Bolivian adoptees. Join them at facebook.com/groups/Bolivian adoptees. That is facebook.com/groups/Bolivian adoptees. Now let me introduce you to our panel. We have Elena Soledad from Brooklyn Wami Designs and Atami Kawayu from Displaced Alteño. Thank you two for joining us. And with our first question, how would you describe your experience being adopted? So yeah, Elena, Tommy.
Okay, all right. So my experience growing up adopted, I in adoption, there's like the word choices that we use to describe it, and I'm gonna kind of dive in here and use a word that's kind of tricky, but I'm gonna say I was lucky to have parents that exposed me to a lot of Peruvian culture. So I've known I was adopted since I was younger, since forever, and anything that had to do with Peru, my parents wanted me to experience it. So in Queens, there's a big Peruvian community, and any chance that anything happened out there, my parents would take me. Any TV shows, articles, as I was growing up, my parents would hand me the information. So I grew up with that. However, I did also, at one point in my adoption, want to be white to fit in with the rest of my family. I did not want to be Peruvian. I always wanted to be Peruvian. I felt like nobody else I knew was Peruvian, but I wanted to be white because at the time that's what I was exposed to. And I guess I started navigating my indigeneity in middle school when, I was able to kind of pick my own friends. In elementary school, my white parents were comfortable around other white parents. So those kids became my friends by our parents' way. But when I was able to make those decisions on my own, I did. And that's how I started navigating my way into my indigeneity and into, who I am today and taking this journey. Yeah.
Thank you, Elena. And I like how you have phrased this where you're sharing how you would want to be white growing up. For me, it was not necessarily I wanted to be white, but I just was white to like the traditional standards of growing up in a suburban area. And I can say that because when I went to St. John's University for college, where I would meet Latinos who had that cultural upbringing, there was a clear difference of who we were, our mannerisms, family stories, backgrounds of like what is music, how do we speak the language, how do we learn the language, and even recently, like this year, it was up to a point because I like to like talk about a lot of like political commentary about like decentralizing Anglo-ness or Latinidad for that matter. One of my peers has shared like, for someone who grew up in an Anglo household, you really know how to say F you to the white man. And my rage of hearing that, because it's like we're supposed to be pals, we're supposed to be friends, and I'm saying, for someone who didn't grow up in an Anglo household, you really know how to get effed by the white man. Now, as wrong as that may be, an emotion that I was at that point, this whole navigating whiteness within my own reality from growing up to even now in my adulthood has been pretty dramatic at points and impactful. But luckily for me, through reading, through books, through mentors, throughout college and grad school, I'm getting to know a bit more who I am and how I embrace my indigeneity as you have shared as well. So Tommy, kind of hearing from these two perspectives, just tell us how you have been growing up being adopted.
When I was a child, like my parents, they tried to make some interest in to know more about Bolivian culture. But like at that time, I wasn't really interested. So I remember we had like these gatherings of Bolivian adoptees when I was a child. But like, I don't know, like it was a bit weird for me because I didn't felt Bolivian. And like I saw these children like once a year. So I did not really have like any close connection with to them. But that's something that changed because when I was like a teenager, you have like these questions like, who am I? What is my identity? Who do I look like? In Belgium, there are no Bolivian, well, there are like very, very few Bolivian people. So most of the time people racialized me as Asian. And a lot of people thought actually I was coming from Asia. Up to the point that I was even questioning myself, like, hey, maybe one of my biological parents was maybe Asian because I don't know, I don't really know. And at the time, I was also not really familiar with Bolivian people, the Bolivian community. And that's also why I returned back to Bolivia to also see, like, do these people look like me? Is there any resemblance? And actually, after my first return trip to Bolivia, how I looked at adoption changed a lot because I was more thinking about like Bolivia's history, the oppression of indigenous people. I was also seeing that I was looking more like indigenous people in Bolivia. I want to say like I could relate more to them because their experience being indigenous in Bolivia is of course different than being indigenous or indigenous roots while growing up in Europe. But still like, and that's also why I try to explore more about my identity, about my indigenous roots. But also I started to think more critically about adoption. And I even had like a point that I really didn't want to be adopted and that I wanted to learn more from Bolivia because I also felt like an alien to Bolivia because I didn't know the language. I didn't know like nothing about culture, politics, or history. And I remember when I met people who traveled to Bolivia, like white people, they often knew more about Bolivia than I did. And I don't know, like it felt like not right for me. So that's also why I started to learn more up to the point that, yeah, that I try to immerse myself really in Bolivia.
I definitely understand. You know, I think the comment you made of it's different to be indigenous and living in your home country than indigenous and living out of your home country. That experience is different, and my parents here would I wouldn't say they would like expose me too much as I got older because when I became a teenager, I was kind of pushing back, you know. But they definitely would allow me to see that side of it. They're like, you know, you're here in New York and you're not there in Peru. So your experience is going to be different. And that was the buildup for when I first went down in like 2006 to like how I would be treated down there would be different than I'd be treated up here. And so, yeah, I definitely get that. I didn't meet any Peruvian adoptees up here until 2005. And actually, I had never met another Peruvian until 2005. And here in New York, they kind of had this, you know, I could only be three things. I could either be Puerto Rican, Dominican, or Mexican. And I was always classified as just Mexican. And there's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, I'm Peruvian, like, and it was like nobody had ever heard of Peru. So I would kind of also shy away from that, like, oh, like nobody hears about it, you know, why would I say that I am? So I kind of just, and I never identified as Latina either. Saying that I was Latina was very weird for me. So yeah, I've always just said indigenous or Peruvian. I never identified with like the Latinx community. And again, these are conversations I would have with my parents a lot or with like friends. I had two friends who were adopted as well. One from Guatemala who looks similar to me, brown skin, long black hair. And then I had another adoptee from Colombia who is a white Colombian. And yeah, so that was my community with adoption at that point.
First of all, I could really relate to what you said, like Elena, about like identifying or not identifying as Latina, because I remember when I was like also more like searching into my own identity, when I was thinking about the identity of Latino or just using the word, and a lot of people don't see me as Latino because they have like this image of a Latino who is like Colombian or Chilean, and it's like a bit more white, tall, and they don't look at me like Latino and are like, you're not Latino, or like they cannot believe like I'm from South America, as they don't really know like are not familiar with the people in like the Andean part of South America. And I think for me, when I returned for the second time in 2015, and when I discovered I was born in the city of El Alto, I think that was the whole beginning point for me to really identify more as Aymara, and to learn more about like Aymara costumes, culture, tradition. As that is for me like the only thing I have that is like some leads towards my biological family in Bolivia. And I think also like when learning more about the history of El Alto, I was also more proud that like it's like a city of like resistance. A lot of activism happens in El Alto, and the city is just very big. Like it's almost, or it's even bigger than La Paz. So there are a lot of things happening in El Alto. And after 2015, I started to go more and more to El Alto. I got more friends from El Alto. And I think in my whole journey, I also got to know better, like, what does it mean to be this or that? And what does it mean to be that within being part of the diaspora?
I was fortunate enough to go to Bolivia when I was in 2010, so I must have been like 16 or 15. And then I went again last summer. Not last summer, the summer before, last year before COVID. And like, just being in my home country, it just felt so, one, the air just smells different. Like that whole environment is just, I feel like it not only just pure, it just feels right, you know? And it just walking the streets, seeing everybody, I was just very, one, shell shocked, but also I just felt like at a very natural, calm state. Maybe that just was Bolivia and La Paz, or maybe just like my own like inclination, but it was just very nice to see, the land I was born in rather than grew up in. And so for like Elena, you shared you had went to Peru. What was your first time going to Peru, and how would you describe that experience?
So my first time was going in 2006. I had found my birth family in 2005. And I went on a volunteer program with my parents. And the reason being is because I feel like they were scared that if something didn't go right, at least we went for like a good cause. Although now I don't super believe in volunteering because I think it's also traumatizing for the kids. But that's a whole nother subject. The first time going, I think it was a super eye-opener. I wouldn't say I cried when I met my birth family, because it was kind of like meeting strangers, you know. My sister was crying. It turns out I have a sister. I have 2 older brothers and a younger brother down there. I have another brother who was adopted to Washington. But he got adopted at 18 months old. Like, so literally, as he was being adopted, I was being born. So it didn't feel real, especially not in Lima. Lima is very city-like. And I want to take this time to say that what we see in mainstream media about Peru is not the same as the Andes. So like the dishes, like for instance, like I knew Peru as like lomo saltado, ceviche, and like kind of the dishes people serve in restaurants these days. But my parents took me to Puno, to Paracas, to Huancayo, everywhere. And it let me see that there's Andean food and like mainstream Peruvian food that kind of are different. So my experience was very all over the place. I guess it's kind of why what I got from it. But definitely this past year, I'll say, in 2019, going there and living in Puno for the time that I was with my family. I think it was the first time I ever felt calm. It was the first time I felt like I could breathe, even though we were like super high up. But yeah, meeting them for the first time wasn't what I wanted it to be. But I guess that's what we build on.
Thank you for that, Elena. For our next question, Atami, what have you gained from being an adopted child, and what may have you lost or never received?
It's a good and a very tough question. What have I gained? Maybe I'll start with what I lost. I think I lost many things while being adopted, because I lost in some way the connection with my ancestral family, my community, my culture, language, almost everything. And I think when I started thinking more about that, about what I lost, like, it was very hard for me at the time, because I had to digest it and to search for a way, like, how could I overcome this? I think that also why I was like returning and learning more. But on the other hand, I think there is also another side of like adoption, and I think this whole experience of being adopted, I think I have gained like, well, first of all, adoption is a very global movement, and at this time I'm like with a lot of people connected throughout, like in every part of the world, like United States, Australia, Europe. I think that's one thing. I think second, well, my sister, for example, she's an adoptee from China, and I think that was also like a very interesting experiences, because she experiences it very different to be an Asian adoptee. I've learned a lot through her about like Asian culture, Chinese culture, and I think that, like, lastly, I think I have tried to be very active within the adoptee community in Belgium, and also like more for Bolivian adoptees as well. And I've learned a lot, like it has taught me a lot of skills of like organizing, like writing. It gave me some space to think about, and to develop like other capacities. So yeah.
Completely agree. We lost a lot, we lost that ability to connect and to kind of even create a community. For me in New York was hard, because again, I never, I didn't really have a community to be in that was rooted in indigeneity. What I've gained is perspective. What I've gained, in all honesty, is privilege. That's the biggest gain. And I don't say that lightly. I say that in the sense of understanding the privilege I have with what comes with having a white family, and understanding that the boundaries that I still don't feel comfortable crossing. And that privilege isn't always a great thing. It can really confuse you at times when you're trying to speak to somebody who is also Indigenous and doesn't have the same privilege as you do. And it comes with a lot of guilt. that privilege comes with so much guilt. Even to know that I can go to Peru and come back whenever I want to. Not whenever I want to, but like the schematics behind it. That's a privilege. And, I don't take it lightly. I do fight for Indigenous rights. Might not be so vocal. I'm trying to get better at being vocal about it, but I do fight for Indigenous rights. And it's hard to, it leaves you kind of in the middle between feeling guilty and feeling like I have this privilege to possibly help somebody else. I'm not saying like, I'm rich or anything, but yeah. I hope that made sense.
Go ahead, Tommy.
Yeah, totally agree. It's like a bittersweet present. And I had like many conversations with Bolivians, like Bolivians who grew up in Bolivia, studied in Belgium or elsewhere, and had like many discussions with them because they always said like, but why are you so, I don't know, disappointed or angry? Because you had like your European life, you have like health insurance, you have all these things, all these privileges. And in some way that's maybe true, but no, when people tell me that, I react that, well, I don't really see them, well, maybe there are privileges, but I also see them as a compensation for the things I've lost. Because when I see it as a compensation, like it feels a bit different, because I'm also sometimes thinking like, well, you could also have like my life, but you have to give up like your family. You cannot speak your language anymore. You cannot connect. You cannot go back whenever you want. And I think not many people would do that for the privileges we gained, actually.
Yeah, it's just like there's so much that is preventing our own ingenuity, even just by like adoption aside, right? Just even if we say, for example, we are in Bolivia, right? There's so many things that would prevent us to even embrace our Mayan or Incan roots just by being in Bolivia. We may know Spanish, but that's the language of the conquistadors. We may have and so like one of the things I like to share that I've gained, like of course like a strong family presence of like 20 plus members or so, like something big like that. Just like a very well education. And when I want to do these service trips, none of my friends who are like these socialists or like these very, for the people movement, they barely donated. But my family who, would put 100 here or there would help me finance so I can then go do my work in Panama, in Chile, and whoever else, so that I can, fulfill the mission that I feel like I have accustomed to be pursuing. And so that's something I feel like I've gained, but also just as much as like in the education realm, I would probably not have learned as much about my own ingenuity the way I am doing if I didn't have a formal education that to back it up. But with that said, though, it may not have, I don't think it's as authentic as it could have been. I don't think it's like through an experience of it, like it could have. But those are things I'm like constantly working on as I continuously move on. But yeah, there is a lot of sense of guilt. There's never really a positive conversation that comes out with, unless I'm talking to like YouTube, for example. It's like, yeah, I'm adopted. Yeah, I have white parents. It usually ends up being like, do I trust this person in front of me now? Does this person really believe what he's believing, or is just like a show? Is this just for the clout, right? And there's that barrier that the second I say that, it's this line that just creates division, even within my own people, whether they're descendants of Mayan or whether they're Latino or Latinidad. There's just like that clear line. So I just want to hear like what are your thoughts on that?
So I think there's this big misconception that when you become adopted, you become like rich or you become it. And you are like, oh my God, you have this great life. You must, have everything you could desire. And that's not the case. And not all adoptees get they don't get the life that everybody thinks. Households do come with abuse. You genuinely don't know who your kid is going to, even though like for my adoption, they had to go through like, I think 2 years of paperwork before they could even adopt me. And so I think there's that big conception of, or misconception of like, when you get adopted, everything is great. And it's not the case. But also like, I just want to, for me, I think it was different because I know a lot of adoptees get adopted into more white communities, white spaces, rural areas. And although my family is white, I did grow up in the city. I grew up in Brooklyn. My experience is of the city. So I was engaged with other cultures and everything in between. So I didn't just see white people, even though it was a bubble that my parents kind of kept me in and they sheltered me a little bit. When I was old enough, I was able to explore how I wanted to explore. I was able to be around who I wanted to be around. And that's really where it navigated towards. So not every experience, every adoptee has the same experience. So, but mine was definitely rooted in the city. And I don't think I would have it any other way.
And especially like when you're interested in like exploring more like your indigenous identity, or when you're like more like with Bolivian people in the States or either in Bolivia. Like in the beginning, like I really felt like very insecure because I was afraid that people would look at me like as a fake Bolivian, because indeed, like we have like white parents, we have been raised, in a very European or Western way. And I think also like a lot of people probably also look at us like this. But what I really think is interesting about this conversation we have is that the three of us, we go beyond this. We go beyond being this adoptee who eats salteñas and who dances maybe a bit. But I have the feeling that there are adoptees who really learn about their history, learn about the oppression, learn even like indigenous languages, or learn about the current politics. And when I think it's like only in the last years I felt more secure about this, when I could more relate and more talk to with other Bolivian diasporic people who are not adopted. And when they talk about certain persons, okay, I maybe still have to learn. But on the other hand, not everything is new for me because I have learned a lot throughout the years, and I'm very happy with this process I made myself. And I'm also like through Instagram, very happy to see that other adoptees are also on this journey, and that they're also like going beyond this superficial way of reconnecting with their country of origin.
I love that because I do see a lot more adoptees diving into their indigeneity. You know, for me, I am currently learning Quechua to speak. My birth mother's first language is Quechua. So I talk to her a lot and we connect on that level. But I also want to point out, like, although a lot of adoptees, I think we do love trying to, get back to our roots, like figure out who we are. I also kind of sometimes wonder if we're romanticizing our countries. I do know some adoptees who have gone back and were like, "Ugh, this is where I'm from. Like, I thought it was going to be something different, like all these, I thought I was just going to see people like me." And it's just like, no, there's tons of other what types of Peruvians, like we have Afro-Peruvian, Andean, everybody. So I also think that people, like some adoptees, romanticize their country. And I worry that sometimes if they romanticize it so much and it falls short of their expectation, how that would make them feel, especially if you come from like such a sheltered life and all you see are like the positive things about Peru or Bolivia or anywhere in Latin America. I worry that people who are super sheltered can't really grasp the country in and of itself, if that makes sense.
I think that's super interesting. And actually, like, I think also a lot of adoptees like sometimes feel the pressure, like to be like, what is it to feel like Peruvian or Bolivian? And then way they try to mimic some kind of idea what they think is Peruvian or Bolivian. And actually, to be honest, like when I'm in Belgium, for me, all the things that are Bolivian or like my mate, for example, I try to drink that every day because it's like something small I can have in my life in Belgium, because all the rest of the things I do are Belgian. But like while living here in Bolivia, I've learned that I don't have actually that pressure anymore. I don't really feel the pressure to do this or to do that. Even though when I do it, it's more because of interest. But it's not that I eat like every day, like typically Bolivian food or something. I think I drink more mate de coco, for example, in Belgium than here in Bolivia.
I definitely romanticize about my home country. I definitely romanticize about. I definitely am guilty of all that. But that's because it's like, I don't know. It's like even if I was to compare like where I grew up and like what I see in Bolivia, it's just like it's completely different. It definitely is beautiful. Like there's nothing more calm than when I went to like what was it, Isla del Sol and Isla de Luna, and just the amount of peace and calmness and like nothing in the world. Although like the world is burning, it doesn't even feel like that. I feel like I can just meditate in peace, and it's like I don't think I can't really find that anywhere and such. And just having that ancestral tie, having a tied with Mother Nature in such a manner, it's like I don't know. I feel it's just on par with me and everything, and definitely why I want to go back and again. Go ahead, Lena.
Sorry. So I'm gonna just kind of go back. I don't mean romanticizing and like you falling in love with it at all. I mean romanticizing in the sense of maybe as some adoptees who haven't gone back, you know, and they're not up on politics, or like they're like, I don't want to go to the mountains. I want to stay in like the Sheraton Hotel or for the entire time of my trip. Like they don't understand the experience, you know, like a lot of us who have found our families, like myself, I don't, you know, again, this is also like a nature versus nurture type of complex. My parents are not those type of parents. They're like, oh, we're staying at a hotel. No, my dad was like, we're gonna go stay like with the host family. Like you have to get the entire experience. Otherwise, what's the point of going? So again, a tricky word in adoption is lucky, but I don't know another word to describe it. But my father was conscious of the decisions he made on that first trip, so that way I could get the full experience. And then the year after, I went by myself on the same with the same program again. It was how my parents felt safe to send me down. And they told me not to go into the town where my birth family was living because they were like, it's super dangerous over there. But I went, and I stayed there because I felt like that's really what I needed, is to understand more of my adoption and more understand where I come from and what my life might have been like. Again, that does come with super guilt, you know, and so a lot of privilege because I can just leave the area if I want to. But when I say romanticize, I mean not like maybe adoptees who haven't gone back to their home country and they just see the positive of it, the beauty of it, and that's beautiful, but it doesn't always work the way that they envision it.
Because for my family, I didn't really, we cooked salteñas when I was in high school, and I think we celebrated States like also maybe like once ever, right? And it was just like one of those things is like, looking back now is, or looking forward now, it's like something that I have to do upon myself, that I have to be the one celebrating and finding my Bolivian peers in New York, which I personally have. And, you know, I'm dancing caporales, which is very nice. Yeah, I fractured my ankle as well within that experience, but it's just, yeah, it's really up to me with like me embracing it. I'm sure if I wanted to know about Beatles, rock and roll, Rolling Stones, I can go to my parents with that type of stuff. But also if I want to know about real estate, if I want to know about banking, if I want to know about, you know, financial literacy and such. But so as a culturally, I can't necessarily depend on any of my parents or family members for that, because they're not part of that culture. They didn't really grow up with it, and it doesn't seem like to be an interest. And so, Tommy, I want you to really answer this. Like, how's the nature versus nurture from your parents in relation to your Bolivianness and also your indigeneity.
And I think it's very interesting when I compare it with my sister. Like me and my adoptive mom, like we have like in some way like a very similar personality. So that really helped me like throughout like my teenage years. And even up till now, we have like a very, very good relationship because we really understand each other. I think nature versus nurture. Um, I don't really know. Like I'm trained as a sociologist, so I was learned more that like things are more you're socialized with this or with that, and um, I think that's also the question that I have. Like when I will maybe meet in the future my birth parents here in Bolivia, like what did I inherited from them? What is really from them? Is there any resemblance? Is it not? But in some way, like when I put like the sociology aside from me, then I sometimes think like I'm very active and I really have like in Belgium, like I have been really active within this adoption landscape, like doing politics and everything. And then when also knowing that I come from Mal Alto, then I think maybe that's something I have like gained from my parents, or I don't know, like from my ancestors that are also from Mal Alto, from the communities that have probably have also fought many battles. And I think that's something like that's really present inside of me. I really feel that.
So exactly what you said. My parents definitely have raised me to be my own person. But again, like I do want to make this very clear because I do know a lot of adoptees get adopted into more wider spaces and or not like cities, like New York City, you know. And my parents were just very out there. My dad is a native New Yorker. My mom is from Ohio, but I think that the personality I have now so much resembles my birth mother. So when we met, it was a little awkward because I like, you know, they are emotional people. And I love it. And I'm a very emotional person. But I don't see a difference between us. When I talk to her, it's like talking to myself. We are literally on the same vibe. I joke with her. I laugh with her. Most of us have the same laugh. So it's really beautiful when I go down and I just see them, or when we're on the phone and there's like 6 of us on FaceTime. And yeah, it's super beautiful.
All right, so moving on to our next question. How would you describe the social political conversations that you have with your family, especially in today's political environment?
My parents are very open-minded. My dad is not very talkative. My mom, she's really talkative and she really likes to learn a lot. So ever since when I started to study like social sciences, I always discussed with her like things I've learned during the course. And she was always open for it. So I remember that when I was learning more about racialization, racism in education and everything, I really talked and discussed this topic with her. And even though like sometimes, or maybe for some topics, she needed more time to think about it, but she eventually understood. And I'm very happy to say that she really supports like my political views, or my political views upon adoption, or from like other things that are happening in the world. So we're really like on the same side upon that. I think also more because she really trusts like me, but also my sister, who is also like on the same political side, I would say.
Okay, so for my adopted family, like my white parents, they're very open, just as well as Atami. Like they're very open. So we don't really we're all kind of on the same side, although they would say I'm a little more like, you know, I guess they kind of stop at liberal, right? And I'm much more than that. I don't know, but In Peru, my brother is in the Marines, and but he is very open. He and I have had like some political discussions, and he's super open. I think the Marines for him is really just like a steady job, and it gave him opportunity. My sister's husband in Peru is a police officer, so we have some differences there, but for the most part, like my sisters, my brothers, my birth mother, and I all kind of have the same ideas and beliefs in terms of politics and stuff.
Thank you for sharing. And on my side of the family, well, let's see. Yeah, very very liberal upbringing, especially on my mother's end. And for my father, he's fairly left of socialist. In terms of political views of such. However, when we talk about ingenuity, and it's a little different from what my perspective is being on Pachamama versus like maybe someone who just views it as socialism as such and creating that dividend. And then to a broader, which in 2016, I was like so angry at this, finding out my family members' political views from my aunts and uncles, because I was like, wait, you're a conservative? Wait, you're like in this realm of republicanism that like for the past like 6 years I've been like being very upset about, like learning about. And but I definitely gained a lot of insight of like what conservatism is, why they can be considered conservatives or Republicans, and as much as there's disagreements there and here, it's definitely very fruitful conversations that I do appreciate. So when I go into conversations with other Republicans who aren't family members, I'm a little just bit more prepared because chances are I already know what you're talking about. And so a lot of pros and cons there, but like at this point, it's like, I'm down like changing their political views, or maybe just exposure to some ingenuity here or there, but there's definitely been some rough conversations amongst the past like 6 or 7 years.
Well, I think the context is a bit different between like United States and the political system in Belgium, because you have like more than just like a conservative and liberal. I think also like people change more from political party because of their discourses they're performing. And I remember, for example, that when I was like 18 years old, and when I was like really new into like I had to vote like the next year, for example. I was learning more about like the political parties, etc. I had discovered that my mother had voted for this right-wing party because of the discourse. And at that time in Belgium, the party was like super popular. A lot of people voted for the party, but there were actually like the party was actually, their political views were an advantage of minorities, people of color. And when I explained like why this party would be in my advantage, a citizen with like a migration background, who gets racialized, she really understood it, and she never voted for them again. So then she was more voting for the Green Party, because she knew like, okay, these parties are more like in the benefit of my children. So yeah, they were always like very open to talk about it.
Sorry, real quick. I think that's something super important is I think for adoptive parents, like prospective adoptive parents, I think it's super important to understand that you are not raising a white child. You are raising a brown child, or a child from a different race, ethnicity, identity, culture, everything. And it is their responsibility to understand that their decisions will affect their child. Yes, I am adopted. Yes, I have privilege due to my white family. But when I walk about the house, the world does not see me and say, let me not target her. Her family's white. No, they don't say that. I am seen as an Indigenous woman moving through this world, navigating through this world. And I've been in circumstances where I have not been protected. And I think it is the duty of my family, of my parents, to make sure that when they vote or their views come back and reflect who they have raised. So,
All right. So for our last two questions, what messages do you have for future adopted children?
your voice matters. Your skin is beautiful. Find community. Go back home if you are able to your home country, and it might change you. And process that change. You're just loved, and there's always community to find.
For me, I would just share that you want a tourist if you're going to your native country. The embracement of that you're looking for is within, and continuing to do right and let the rest will follow. Being an adopted child, you're gonna go through some trials and tribulations, not just with identity, not just with society, not just with family, not just with your peers, but more importantly, yourself and the circumstances you go through, whether it's your workspace or school, whatever the case may be. But you definitely gotta just make the best of it, because you're here for a reason. So our next question, what messages do you have for future parents who like to be adopted, who would like to adopt?
Do your research. Don't just go into this saying you want a child from another country and not do your research. I think that is more harmful to the potential child you could be adopting. And don't shelter them from who they are. It is not the same as bringing up a white child, especially not here in America. It is not the same. Make sure that you go into this with an open heart, an open mind, and really take the time to understand who you are first and what you believe in first, and how what you believe in eventually will trickle down to your child who does not look like you, who will not experience life the same way as you, who will experience love, relationships, friendships differently than maybe you thought.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, do your research. I think it's super important for adoptive parents that, they not just read like one or few books, but that they really are in contact with adoptees and that they're just open for what adoptees have to say, like that they can understand, like they don't really have to agree with, but they have to understand and respect. And I think most importantly is that their love isn't conditional. And I think what helped me, like in my whole journey, was that my parents always emphasized in any possible way that whatever would happen, they would never let me go. They would always be there for me. And I think that is also what made that we have like such a strong bond. And even though like whatever that might happen, I know that they will always be there for me. And I think especially as an adoptee, that's important.
Don't come into being a parent, especially being an adopted parent, pursuing it as like some type of white savior complex. All people do not need a savior. Anything, we just need to be empowered on our own merit. The next thing is, don't adopt your children as puppets for your politics, as it's like we're not here for show. If you're really about like helping marginalized people, unmarginalized communities, don't just stop at adopting children. Continue looking in the community that you live in, particularly if it's affluent white, as they do need a lot of working within themselves and deconstructing their own whiteness and affluence. And then lastly, know that you're adopting someone who has generations behind them, and build upon that. With that said, that is all the time that we have. Thank you all for joining us. And for everyone at home, make sure you like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also comment below, how has your experience with adoption been, whether as a child or parent? Then follow us on all our social media outlets at Latin Entertainment _presents. That is Latin Entertainment _presents. Also, you can listen to us on our various podcast platforms that vary from Spotify, Apple Music, and Google Podcasts, just to name a few. Lastly, our next and final episode of this It All Starts at Home season is going to be on the winter holidays and Latinidad. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time as Latin Entertainment presents Conversamos.
Yeah, yo, is it that wrong? I'm making a song, I'm taking it back for the platform that I formed. Music's helping me transform. I run the reservoir, the predator, like a hungry carnivore. When I'm breaking through these heavy doors, this is Desert Storm. A metaphor to show I'm equipped and informed. I'm striking with the mega force, I'm lukewarm. Your crew